Welcome to the Been There, Done That podcast with Angela Dunn Cartledge. Hi, everyone. You're listening to the Been There, Done That podcast, and I'm your host, Angela Dunn Cartledge. I'm here with Felicity Ashley, my new good friend, who's going to tell us all about resilience and her personal journey through so many obstacles. I can't even start with any of them. Hi, Felicity. I'm so glad you're here.
Hi, Angela. It's great to be here. Thank you very much for having me.
I'm so thankful that you reached out with your story, because I think it is such an empowering story for those of us that have gone through hard seasons. Your hard season is without a doubt one of the hardest I've ever heard of. So I want to know. I want you to tell the audience a little bit about yourself and a little bit about why you're here, and then we can jump in to our amazing conversation.
Of course. First off, I'm a mum. I'm a mum of three. My children are now 7, 10, and 12. I'm a marketeer by background. So I spent over 20 years leading marketing teams for some of the UK's largest organisations. I'm an ocean rower, so one of fewer than 250 women in the world to have rowed an ocean. And I'm a cancer survivor. And I suppose it's a combination of those last two things which became the catalyst for a career change for me. So I'm now a motivational keynote speaker as well as an author. And I really talk about my personal journey of adventure and adversity and some of the tools and the techniques that I've used through that period to kind of help me get through the difficult times, the challenges, and to really come out thriving. And so I now work with organizations and leaders and teams to help them kind of perform through adversity or through pressure, whether that's pressure within an organization, whether that's external pressures, whether that's pressures or challenges that are facing in their personal lives. So as you can imagine, lots of different kind of personal experiences, but also professional experiences that I can draw on when I'm working with my organizations and clients now.
I love that you started with that you're a mother. That if that doesn't provide enough adversity and obstacles to jump through, then on top of it, we have the career path before, then we have the ocean rowing, we have the cancer survivor. I mean, there's just so many beautiful things about your story. I can't wait to dig in. So I want to ask my first curious question, and that is, when did you start rowing? What was that? When was that part of your story?
Actually started rowing at school, so probably when I was about 16 or so. Um, and I rode to a reasonable standard at school. I mean, I'm not very big, as a person. I'm 5'4", so I'm fairly petite. I'm not the usual build of a rower, but I really enjoyed rowing at school, and I found it something I was quite good at. I think I was, maybe stronger than I looked, and I worked hard at it, and I did okay for my size, I guess. But I loved rowing. But then I stopped rowing and I didn't row for then 25 years until my sister asked if I'd like to row the Atlantic with her. And so then I took up ocean rowing. Similar technique, but yeah, a world of difference in other ways.
I could only imagine just my knowledge of water bodies on our Earth, that would be quite a different experience, but so much more vast and amazing at the same time. I mean, I feel like the ocean gives us the perspective of how small we are compared to this earth that we live on and all the beautiful things that it does. So I love that so much. So you have your career, you're doing your thing, marketing and growing in your world, and your sister says, "Let's go row the Atlantic," and you say, "Yeah, okay, sure, let's do that."
Why not?
I love your sense of adventure. I'm so envious of it. I have protected myself way too much in this life, and I can't wait to have more adventures in the second half of my life. But Talk us through how that went. What kind of training did you have to go through? What did you have to do to get ready for that particular event?
Yeah. I mean, just rewinding slightly, and you talk about my sense of adventure. When she initially asked if I wanted to do it, I said no. Because, like you say, I was protecting myself. I said, well, of course I can't do it because I just had a hip replacement. And I said, look, I've got three, the kids are too young. I can't leave them for 2 months to go and row an ocean. Um, and so I suppose the narrative that I was telling myself was I can't do it. But she said, look, stop giving me reasons why you can't, start giving me reasons why you can. And that just flipped that narrative for me. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I was going to say yes, because this was an incredible opportunity. It felt very much like a once in a lifetime opportunity. And I didn't want to sit on the sidelines and watch my sister go and do this extraordinary thing when I had that chance to do it as well. So I suppose her advice to me really was the thing that turned it all on its head, and was the thing that encouraged me to say yes. And then what followed was almost 2 years of training and preparation, both physical training. There was a lot that we had to do to get our bodies ready for an ordeal or a challenge like that, rowing 3,000 miles unsupported. But there was also an awful lot of mental preparation, because just the concept of being in a small rowing boat in a massive ocean where you can't see land for weeks and weeks and weeks on end, um, and you don't know how long it's going to take you. It took us 40 days in the end, but we didn't know if we'd be out there for 40 days, 60 days, 80 days. So, you push off from the start line and you have no idea when you're going to see somebody, when you're going to see your family members again, or another thing, another vessel. So that takes an awful lot of mental preparation as well. But on top of all that, we also had the logistics of putting together an adventure and a challenge like that, from raising the funds that we needed to get to the start line, through to kind of practical considerations like, for mums, leaving children for 2 months is no mean feat. So there are all sorts of arrangements that we had to put in place, through to kind of doing all of our technical skills and courses. So it was a busy, full on, pretty much 2 years. And on top of all of that, it was during COVID. So we signed up pretty much at the same time as we went into lockdown number one. And that brought, its own challenges, because for a good chunk of our training period, we weren't even allowed to see each other. We couldn't get together to train. So we had to train in a very different way. We had to switch lots of our activities to virtual online meetings or online courses, and then just take advantage of the times when lockdown lifted and we could actually go out on the water in the boats and train together. So yeah, it was definitely a busy 2 years of juggling training alongside parenting, working, homeschooling, all the rest of it. Yeah. Didn't leave us much time for twiddling our thumbs.
Well, or to really, you were planning and you were working toward it, but it sounds like you also didn't have a whole lot of time to doubt yourself. You didn't give yourself that much time to do that. And so that was, I love that concept that you're like, if we just power through, we will get this done. And I think that is a really um, fearless way of attacking it. All the
Yeah.
while, you don't know, but your body knows that something isn't right. So now you're out on the boat and you're rowing with your beloved sister and you're beating all of these odds and you're doing all of these things that you're in the ocean for all these weeks, just what you described, all the logistical issues. And you don't even know yet that you are sick.
Yeah, yeah. And that's the extraordinary thing looking back, was that I had advanced bowel cancer. When I was diagnosed, it was stage 3. And it had probably been there for over a year. So I'd done most of my training and the whole of the row whilst my body was, internally coping with cancer. Um, and what's extraordinary is that physically I was robust. It didn't bother me. Looking back, we saw the original signs during the row, which was a change in bowel habits, but nothing about what we were doing was normal. So it was entirely understandable that there would be you'd expect a change in bowel habits when you're rowing 12 to 16 hours every day in the relentless heat and eating food that you don't normally eat. We were eating on the whole most of our calories from dehydrated, army rations. And so it would be quite odd if your bowel movements were normal during those circumstances. And it's only looking back that I realised that the first symptoms that I noticed were when we were on the boat, and I won a boat award for being the mother most likely to need an inconvenient poo on night shift. And that was because for some reason during night shift, I'd get this cramping in my tummy, and I'd have to say to my sister, who was rowing with me at the same time, "I'm really sorry, I'm just going to have to break my shift just to use the bucket." And the bucket was our boat toilet. And we laughed it off. I was literally the butt of the crew jokes, but those were the original symptoms. And it was only when I got home and that didn't settle down, and in fact I started needing the loo more and more often, that I thought, this isn't right. I need to go and get this checked out. And the thing that the doctor said we just need to rule out is the thing that I was diagnosed with. So that came as quite a shock, because you just don't expect a cancer diagnosis having just done one of the world's toughest endurance events, and when I felt and looked fitter and stronger than ever.
And you were an active person ahead of time. It wasn't like, I mean, of course, this is a different level of active, I know, but it wasn't as if you had not had any activity your entire life and then all of a sudden. But that's what we do with cancer. It feels like we tend to say, well, that won't happen to me, that happens to someone else. And then when it happens to us, we have to then grieve that dichotomy of what we just are going through.
Yeah,
Talk
yeah.
us through that for I know that's part of your book and part of the amazing story that you tell in your speeches, but talk us through that transition for you. And you touched on it just a moment ago, but what did that do for you in terms of what it meant for changes in your life and in your family's life?
Yeah, I mean, there was I suppose a short period of time where it was just almost inconceivable that this was happening, because on one hand I just literally just rode an ocean and I was on top of the world feeling invincible, yet on the other the doctors were telling me that you are very ill and you pretty much need nice life-changing surgery and then chemo to try and ensure that you survive this thing. And so, but I remember waking up from my surgery and just feeling compelled to share on social media a picture of me with tubes up my nose and a puffy face, having just woken up, alongside the picture of me looking fitter and stronger than ever, having just rode the ocean, to show that juxtaposition of the two things, and to show that it can happen to anyone at any point in their lives. It really is indiscriminate. And to try and encourage people not to fall into that trap of thinking it won't happen to me. Because I think that's what you do. You just never expect something like that, particularly not, I was 35 at the time. You just don't expect that to happen. And I think, therefore, it's much easier to ignore symptoms. And I just wanted to raise awareness of symptoms, to encourage people to get themselves checked out if they feel anything's not quite right. Because the worst thing you can do is to sit on it and leave it. And then you might be facing a very different kind of situation and diagnosis.
That
Um,
gets to your point that you were already at stage 3 and you didn't even really experience that much discomfort. I mean, you noticed obviously in the way you described it, but it wasn't that you felt particularly sick. And that is, I really love your point about it's not discriminate. We think of cancer because it is a disease, we think of it as you are sick in some way, your body is sick. But that isn't the way cancer works. It actually tricks your body into thinking that it's well. And that is where the whole thing becomes kind of a brain mesh, of what we're
yeah,
actually going through. It's
yeah.
really crazy. Yeah.
And maybe because I was, in one sense, so physically fit and strong, my body was able to mask the symptoms much better and cope with them much better than potentially other people would have been able to do. Um, so there was that element of kind of, I suppose, shock and disbelief. But I'm a natural born optimist. I'm always a glass half full kind of person. And I think even though it would have been really easy at that point to think, woe is me, and, to think, why is this happening to me? Because I'm young, fit, and I've just rode the Atlantic, I was able to actually turn that on its head and think, well, why not me? Because I'm young, fit, and strong, I'm actually much better placed than almost anyone else on the planet to get through this. And so for me, I guess the background going into it became a positive and became a massive strength and a superpower that I was then able to take to anchor me through surgery and then the following treatment. And it became kind of something that I clung on to give me that self confidence and self belief that I was going to get through it and I was going to be okay. And I think that whole mindset is so important when you're going through any kind of challenges or adversity. It's having that belief and confidence that you're going to be okay, and trying to, find the positives in any situation. Um, and it was leaning on the resilience that I knew I had through rowing the ocean, both mentally and physically, that really did help me through.
And that's the thing you had proven just minutes, minutes in a lifetime before you were diagnosed, that if I can do that, I can do this. I mean, there's science and technology on my side and all this beautiful things, and my body can do amazing things. I just proved it. That's such a
Exactly.
cool way to look at it and to think about it in a more optimistic way than a death sentence, really, because a lot of people go into it, especially at stage 3, thinking, "Oh no, now what?" Yeah,
Yeah. And I think, it can be easy to mentally to slip into that position of thinking, well, that's not necessarily life over, but that's, my best day's done. And to see it as a limiting factor for whatever future you have. Um, but I guess I didn't see it that way at all. It was almost a reason to push on in defiance. There was definitely an element of belligerence going on as well, because I thought, I haven't just rowed an ocean and trained for 2 years to row an ocean and survive the Atlantic to now be taken down by this. So yeah, it was a little bit of me versus cancer, and putting two fingers up to cancer, I suppose. Um,
I do not knock having some stubborn, as you called it, belligerence in the face of something like this. You have to, um, if it's a positive motivation, if it's a life-giving motivation, bring it on. I mean, that is the way to go. I love that you said, "I didn't go to the woe is me place." And I think that's where a true mission, a true vision for your life is so important, that you want good things. You want good things for your family. It doesn't always mean that you'll have a positive outcome, but the point is that you go into it thinking, I'm I'm gonna win. Whatever this looks like, I'm gonna win. How do you then take that mentality and motivate other people? How do you turn that into a book, speeches, guest speaking on podcasts? How do you take that to the world?
I mean, in lots of different ways, but there's certainly, I suppose, when I look back on how I've managed situations like that, it's the tools or the techniques that I've leaned on myself, and those are the kind of the practical tools and techniques that I teach people, through my keynotes, but also through the book as well. And I think it's so important to have some of those practical strategies for dealing with challenges or adversity, rather than just having, an example or a story to listen to. So for me, one of them is understanding your individual superpower or your inner strength. And we're all different, and so often we kind of try and compare ourselves with other people, and we feel inferior in different ways. But it's not about comparing yourself to other people. It's about finding what makes you unique, and it's finding your own superpower. And for me, when I was told I needed a hip replacement, my hip surgeon said to me, look, 99% of people with a hip in your condition couldn't even walk down the road, yet you can still run for an hour. And I remember driving away from my hospital appointment that day, and I should have felt pretty down in the mouth. I was 39 at the time, having and told that I needed this major surgery. But I remember feeling really uplifted and elated by the conversation. And I knew it was an odd reaction. And it was only when I stopped to think about why I felt uplifted that I realized, when he told me that 99% of people couldn't walk, yet I could still run, that was in my head, I interpreted that as, well, you must be nails. You can do stuff that most people can't. And that is something that then for me became my superpower. Because in my head, I now thought, well, I'm nails. I can do stuff that most people can't. Therefore, I can row the Atlantic. Therefore, I can get through cancer. I can get through any challenge that's thrown my way. So for me, that's become almost a label now that I given myself and that I try and live up to, and that gives me the confidence to say yes to bonkers challenges or whatever it might be. Um, but that's my own, that's very personal to me, but everyone's got their own. And I think it's about taking the time to understand what makes you unique, what your inner strength is, having a conversation with someone else, because sometimes it helps to hear it from somebody else, because we don't often maybe identify these traits in ourselves.
We're too down in the weeds, right? We get too down in the little information about ourselves, and we have that wonderful inner critic
Yeah,
too.
yeah, yeah. So that's one of the kind of strategies that I talk about a lot. But the second one is around just reframing, which again is so easy to do. It takes a bit of practice and you've got to build it as a habit. But it's about, instead of thinking, why me? Well, why not me? Or instead of, I can't do it yet. I mean, there's any number of different ways that you can turn things around, but it's very simple, but it's so effective in terms of helping you find the positives in an otherwise negative situation, or seeing challenges as opportunities. And it really does help turn things on the head and help you find a different perspective when you're, in a spot of bother. Um, but I also think it's really important to understand what's motivating you, or your why. And the thing for me through both the row and then the cancer treatment was my children. And through the row, visualizing the children at the finishing line in Antigua was something that we had in our minds all the time, and it definitely helped keep us going when the going got tough out there. But also, as a young mum going through cancer treatment, I didn't want them to grow up without their mum, and so I was doing everything I possibly could to make sure I got better for my children. And so I think really having an understanding of your motivation and your why is so important to help you through challenges. It's that light at the end of the tunnel that's going to help draw you forward. Um, and yeah, again, it can take a little bit of time, and it might help having a conversation with somebody else, but really taking that time to understand what is your driver, what is your reason for getting up every morning and pushing through. It's well worth investing that time.
Hey there, it's Angela from Been There, Done That. If you're navigating the wild, unpredictable world of grief, I want to invite you to something special. It's called Messy Mornings, and it's our free weekly newsletter filled with real talk, gentle reminders, and support that actually meets you where you are. Each week, I'll send you stories, reflections, healing prompts straight to your inbox. No fluff, no pressure, just the space to release, feel, and heal. You don't have to do this alone. Head over to donethatpodcast.com and sign up for Messy Mornings. It's totally free and it's made with you in mind. I've been there, and let's walk through this together. It's so um, it gives me hope to hear you say those things, that there is a way to talk to ourselves, to practice those things, to build those muscles within our own selves, to become more optimistic and grateful for what this world has provided us along the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you mentioned grateful, and actually I think gratitude plays a huge part in it as well. Um, and that's something that definitely helped me through the row, because it was, 40 days in a small boat with three other women. There's nothing natural or normal about it. It was tough. There were days, when it was physically and mentally really hard. But every single day, I reminded myself how much of a privilege it was to be on that boat, that I'd chosen to do this thing. And that helped me quash any negative thoughts ever, because I was just so grateful to be there, to have that amazing opportunity that most people in the world will never get to do. And I think gratitude, again, is so powerful.
So
Just
that's
remember, and it can be grateful for just the small things in life, the sun shining, or you hear the birds singing, or there's a flower growing. There's always something to be grateful for. And again, just taking a few minutes every morning to think about those reasons to be grateful can really help you frame the day ahead.
Absolutely. And the vast beauty that you saw, I can't even imagine that concept of like you said, just looking out into the ocean and there's no land. There's no anything. It can be disconcerting, but also really provide great perspective. I can imagine that completely.
It was awe-inspiring, 360 degrees of blue, everywhere you look. It's sort of the same view, but it's ever changing. The sea state is always changing. There's always different patterns of clouds in the sky. And just it really gives you a sense of your position and your place on the earth. We are so tiny compared to everything else.
We
Yeah,
think our life is so giant, and yet we look at that and think, yeah, okay, we're a
yeah,
lot smaller than we think we are. Yeah,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
And then seeing things like, we saw hundreds, thousands of dolphins, just swimming alongside us and just watching them and they were literally leaping out of the water, jumping for joy. And it was just such a beautiful thing. And again, such a privilege to be able to experience that as they were just playing around the boat, and to witness nature as it's meant to be in its raw beauty was incredible.
I love your optimism, your sense of adventure, your risk taker side. But let's go back to your diagnosis because there's more to that particular piece of that story. It wasn't just you that was struggling with cancer at that moment. So you go in and you go to start your chemo, and what happens?
Yeah, so my dad had terminal cancer at the same time. So he was diagnosed with kidney cancer about 4 years before I was diagnosed. And although we didn't necessarily know it at the time when we did the row, he was kind of getting towards the latter stages of that. Although mum and dad both came to the start in La Gomera and flew out to Antigua to see us finish, which was incredible. They were so proud. Um, and then, so I had my diagnosis, and it was an awful shock. And actually, one of the worst things about it was having to tell my parents because I knew it would totally break their hearts. Dad had, well, both of them had such personal experience of going through cancer treatment and what it meant and what it was going to take out, take away from you. And I just can't imagine what it must be like to then witness a child going through that. So that was almost the worst thing for me, was how I was going to tell my parents, because I knew in particular it would break my dad's heart to know that I was going to have to go through what he was going through. And then the morning after I started my chemotherapy, dad died. And that was really tough. That was just like, what else is life going to throw at me here? Um, and so on top of kind of dealing with, the physical symptoms and the physical side effects, and the emotional side of cancer myself, I was then going through the grief of losing dad, supporting mum. So there were lots of, I suppose, mixed emotions going on there. Physically, it was tough because I was experiencing the side effects of chemo, which aren't very pleasant. But it was really hard to try and unpick what was the side effect from chemo and what was a symptom or a side effect from grief of losing dad. And I remember having a follow-up call with my oncologist, or I think it was one of the oncology nurses, in a few days after my first round of chemo, and going through questions like, are you feeling low? And I'd said, well, I am, but I've just lost my dad. Are you feeling nauseous? Yeah, I am, but I've just lost my dad. Are you feeling tired? Are you sleeping? Not really. I've just lost my dad. And it was so hard to unpick what was grief, what was chemo. Um, yeah, that was it. It did feel like life was, throwing a few nasty curveballs my way at that point.
Yeah, and your support system that was there before had shifted. Of course, there's one less really important person in it, but also that same group of people are mourning both things too. And granted differently because they're not experiencing it firsthand as you are, but it's almost like the whole mass of you went into this phase too, and then into the next phase. It while supporting each other, you also supported each other through that second phase, that second piece of that process too. And I can see your optimism even in the way you described how hard that was, that it was still you're still Felicity in there. You're still doing those those things, those bringing those tools to the front, because that was how you knew you would survive. That was how you knew you would get through it, not just the cancer, but also the grief of losing someone so important to you.
Yeah, and even in those really dark days, I was able to find the positives and the slivers of light. Because I was having cancer treatment myself, I wasn't working at the time. And so I had time, weeks to go and spend with mum and dad in the last days of, the last few weeks of dad's life. And then to be able to be at my parents' house with mum after dad died and support her through that time. And I wouldn't have been able to do that if I hadn't had cancer myself, because I would have been at work and I'd have, faced that dilemma of, needing to carry on working really, but also wanting to spend time away looking after mum and dad. Um, and so again, I was able to see that as a positive, that, cancer had given me that opportunity to have those last few precious weeks with dad and then to be with mum afterwards. Um, and so it is, again, it's a mindset, it's a perspective thing, it's a mindset set piece. And I was still able to turn things on the heads, even in those tough days. But also, I talked about how important your motivation and your why is. And for me, the children were such a big reason to keep positive at that point as well, because it's really hard to explain cancer to children. Cancer to children means people dying, people losing their hair. It's quite black and white, especially for children of the ages that mine were at the time. And they knew that my dad, who was their what they call popper, they knew that dad was going to die from cancer. And it was so hard to try and explain that I also had cancer, but I was going to be okay. And so for me, one of the most important things was keeping strong, both mentally and physically for them, so that it didn't frighten them, so that they saw that I was okay and that they didn't fear that I was, going to die as well. And that really did give me some kind of inner superpower to pull myself together and keep going through that.
To push yourself to be in a better way for them, but also for you. I mean, ultimately, you're still here. You're telling this story to everyone. We wouldn't know each other had it not been for your story. Those kinds of beautiful things that have bloomed as a result of that is uh, truly remarkable. I laughed internally, but also you probably saw my face move when I heard you say that I was so thankful for cancer because I got to spend more time with my family. And you think that I've never heard anybody say that before. So I'm so thankful for you for that perspective alone. And then you kept decided then that this was this going back to your old career wasn't where you really felt led. Talk us through what led you to here, to being here on this show and the beauty that is your story.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first part of it was, I mentioned it earlier, but it was waking up from surgery and just feeling compelled to share that part of the story. The juxtaposition of rowing an ocean with cancer to raise awareness and to help other people in the future. So that was definitely something that kind of lodged in my mind. And then actually, what happened when I went back to work after my cancer treatment finished, there'd been a corporate restructure at work, and I ended up taking redundancy. So that was probably the final catalyst, the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle that really made me think, whoa, the world is trying to tell me something here. Um, and I think it was the combination of the resilience that I developed through the row and then the cancer treatment, but also a new sense of self-worth and, valuing myself, and this new found purpose in life that gave me the courage to do something different and to not default to go back into the corporate world, but to actually share my story as a speaker. And it took a little while to kind of come around to the idea, but I had lots of different conversations with lots of different people, including a coach. And all of them seemed to come back to, well, have you thought about sharing your story? It's really inspirational. And to start with, I'd go, no, that's not what I do. No, that's a ridiculous idea. Or I suppose there's only so many times you can hear, have that similar conversation before the penny starts to drop. And I then investigated what it would entail. And, one thing led to another. And here I am. professional speaker, having written a book, doing lots of podcasts, and sharing my story. Um, and I think what I didn't really appreciate to start with was how sharing our stories really does provide inspiration to other people, particularly when, I very much position myself as an ordinary working mum. I describe myself, the first thing I mentioned when I introduced myself was I'm a mum of three, because I think people kind of relate to that and they can see, and if they can see me doing things and able to get through challenges, then I think people can understand that they can do it as well. Um, and that's been one of the really gratifying things about speaking and sharing my stories, hearing from people afterwards who have, said how much it resonates with them and how they've made changes in their own lives because of hearing me. And that makes it all worthwhile, knowing that our own personal experience can help other people. Even as, as we've done today, talking about grief, and I've had people who've read the book and said it's actually really helped them process grief that they've experienced in the past. And maybe we underestimate the power of sharing our experiences and stories.
I absolutely agree with that 100%. And I'm a little biased only because that's how this show was born. But I I feel that the hardest piece in telling our stories is to say it the first time, to get that initial um, journal entry that becomes the chapter, that becomes part of the book, that then becomes part of the keynote speech, or vice versa, however that process works, that it becomes part of you, but it becomes easier to share it the more we do it. And I think that's such a great metaphor for life, in that we think something is going to be so hard, like rowing across an ocean, as an example. And then we realize that not that it wasn't hard, but that in doing so, we learned new things. We found new strength. We found new ability to be able to then come home, get a cancer diagnosis, lose our wonderful father, and then move through all of that at the same time. And it is just such um, it is a beautiful resilience story, but like I said, where I can relate to the story is that I have so much hope in the learning process, in the practicing that you've described, because it is so powerful to know that even though I am not a world-class ocean rower, that I can still learn from Felicity. And that is where I think we sometimes break down in our ability to share our stories. We think, but how many other people on this earth have the exact experience of Felicity Ashley? Not many. But that doesn't mean that Felicity can't reach people, and that doesn't mean that people can't relate to the story. And so that is where I see, I mean, I don't know that you and I could be more different in that way. Um, I'm the least athletic human I know, but I also have 3 young children, and I think we're a similar age. So there are those pieces too that sort of come along with this idea that our identity is tied to specific things that we've done, but really your message about superpower is so powerful in that we who we are at our core will help us to get where we need to get. And so I really am just incredibly thankful for this entire process. But I have one final question, I think, for you. And I really want to see what your definition of resilience is.
I think it's partly about the ability to pick yourself up when you're hitting a setback and to find a way through, whether it's under, over, around. It's having the tenacity to pick yourself up and keep going. Um, but it's not about relentlessly doing that either and just continuously plowing on. It's about having the self awareness to know when to stop as well, to take a pause, to take a break, almost to kind of gather yourself to be able to launch yourself back in again. So I think it's bound up in the self confidence and self belief to know that you can get through. That gives you the courage to pick yourself up, but also the self awareness to learn when you do need to stop, um, because you can't just keep going and keep going and keep going.
Yeah, I mean, you can't, you. I can't decide that I'm going to be a professional basketball player. That is not gonna happen because I am 5'4" as you are, and I don't think that's going to happen for me anytime soon. But I so plowing through toward that end probably is not gonna get me the same results as if I were to choose a different path. But what I love what you say there is that it changing paths or deciding to back up a step and rethink the path is not giving up.
Yeah,
That's actually part of the definition of resilience, and I love that that is part of your definition, that you're saying, "I can change my mind anytime
yeah,
I want to." Now, probably would have been a lot harder on day 20 of a row across the Atlantic, but you can change your mind anytime you want. The path can shift anytime. And that is what I love the most about this hope that you are giving us. And that is that we, in knowing ourselves better, have the ability to make better decisions for everyone, not just ourselves. And that is such a cool thing to take away
yeah,
from this. It's very
yeah.
optimistic of you, Miss Ashley.
Thank you
Very
very much.
optimistic of you. I keep going back to your belligerence comment and in the your description of yourself. Um, my business coach calls it, deliriously confident. That's what I feel like that belligerence comes out as, is deliriously confident that, again, not that the only path is one path, but that I can choose and that I know I will win no matter what happens. I really, really
Yeah.
love.
I mean, I'm a huge believer in that. And I think it's having come through different challenges that now gives me the confidence that I can do things. And I might not know how I'm going to get there in the end, but I know I can get there. And that then gives you the confidence to say yes and take the first step and commit to doing something. And you know that you will find a way. You don't know what that route looks like. And you might end up taking a few kind of circuitous routes or backward steps along the way, but you know you will find a way to get there. And that all comes down, in some ways it's taking a leap of faith, but it's backing yourself. And
Right.
that's through, looking back and realizing that you've done it before and therefore you can do it again. It's just applying that self confidence and self belief to something different. And that can be a professional situation, a personal situation. It could be any number of different things.
A grieving situation,
Yeah. Yeah.
a thing that your sister convinces you that you can do, whatever that looks like. But it is so there are so many wonderful avenues this can go down. So I want to know what's next for Felicity. There, you have the book out and you're doing speaking engagements. Tell us what the title is of the book and how we can find it and how we can find your speeches.
Yeah. So the title of the book is Stronger Than the Storm. It probably does what it says on the tin. And it's available at Amazon, everywhere, where you would might look for your books, in Kindle format and paperback. My website is felicityashley.com, and that's got all of the information about my speaking, but I'm also very active on social media, LinkedIn and Instagram. Felicity Ashley is an unusual name, so I'm fairly easy to track down, which is always helpful. Um, yeah, but I suppose what I'm doing now as well is practicing what I preach, and it's about continuing to challenge myself and take on, different challenges. They might be professional, like writing a book, or personal physical challenges. So I'm in the process of signing up to do my next big physical challenge, which will be another row, but a row across the mid-Pacific next year. And that will mark 4 years since my cancer diagnosis. And it will be alongside my sister as well. So I really can't wait to take that on. Similar to the Atlantic, but in different in very many ways.
Yes, we talked about the weather and all of those fun uh, things that you cannot control when you're out in the middle of the ocean. So I cannot wait to hear about the next big adventure of Felicity Ashley. I'm really excited. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for your story. Thank you for your tenacity, your belligerence, your delirious confidence, and thank you for sharing it with us. I really can't thank you enough.